Okay, so this is a joint work with Kike Alberola and Gong Cheng. They are two economists of the Bank for International Settlement, and Stavros Zenios, who I think is there in the audience, in case he will answer to the questions, and myself, from Italy. The title of the talk is, as Luis just says, is about debt sustainability. We have been working in this field for many years now, and we start like in 2008, and our milestone was this this consultancy job we did for the ESM. And where we studied for them a debt sustainability model, which contains stock of debt and the flow of debt, and where you find the details that were published in operational research. And the year after, we start working also, with the central bank, the Bank for International Settlement. Because it happens that, it was the period of the pandemic, and, most of these, the BIS is the central bank, is the club of the central banks. So these two economists we met, they were worried about, well, they wanted to study the effect of, on the deployment of these unconventional monetary policies on debt sustainability analysis. Actually, this is an ongoing project. We are still working on that, and at the moment we are working on the effect of climate on debt sustainability. So this is a very, very core project for us. Okay, so let me give you more in details about the motivations that led us to work with these two economists and to then to write a paper about that. During the pandemic, we witnessed an enormous effort of the monetary of the central banks to save economics from the terrible effect of the reduction of GDP. And all central banks, they have deployed these unconventional tools. This gave the opportunity to the countries to have a more expansionary fiscal policy. And now the point was, at a certain point, well, still, we are trying to understand what would be the effect, but is that, we are interested in looking at the effect of this ending and unwinding of such a unconventional monetary policies. Definitely, we observe, a reduction of spreads in Europe. This is a characteristics actually of Europe. So, in Europe we have a central bank, but we don't have a joint debt. So this means that, the difference in debt levels, the difference in the indebtedness of any country, it's measured in some way, and the effect is on the spread. So each, European country measure its credit risk through the spreads over the AAA German bonds, basically. But even though they are not AAA, but the spread of the credit spread of European countries are over the German bonds. So what we did actually in this paper is to analyze the European unconventional monetary policies put in forth of the European Central Bank, which is known as a PEPP, which stands for Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program. And so we will go through it just to to look at the effect and what are the effect also in the long period, the sustainability. What about if PPP had not been introduced? Let me show you this nice graph, because you see this is actually when the pandemic start, and you see these are the spreads of most of the European countries. I think this is Italy, if I'm not wrong, and this is, of course, these are the the countries that have the lower debt in Europe. And just after the pandemic, at a certain point, the Lagarde just made a statement saying, well, ECB is not there to close the spread. And this launched a big speculation, at least in Italy, where they start selling, long-term bonds, and the spread went to the rocket, almost 400 basis points. So 400 basis points is huge level of the spread. After, 400 basis point is not sustainable if it's happened for, like 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 months. So at a certain point, Lagarde they realized that, so they launched the so-called PPP. And in particular, you see now how the spread went down. So the fact that the ECB provided this tool to help the sovereign countries to give a more expansionary fiscal policy, they tranquilize the markets. And this is observed through all the pandemic until nowadays. Nowadays still the spreads are not quite high. Italy is this dash green like this, and now we are about at 200 basis points. So it's still actually at the same level of when we started before the pandemic. One of the main consequences you see in the picture below is that if we had if we wouldn't have the PPP, we would observe this kind of increase in spreads, and the dark blue line, the dark blue bar, that just represent this case. And of course, it would have been followed by an increase also of debt. Now, consider that this is, the experiment we did, since that BIS, they didn't want to take a position about a country, specifically a country. So we ran the experiment looking at a representative country with high debt. So basically, we took 3 countries with the highest debt in Europe, and we average. So, the average, you see, start from like, the red line is the actual debt to GDP ratio, and it went to 100 basis points, but actually Italy went to 160 basis points at a certain point. So this is kind of an average country. And, that would have been the consequence of the high spreads. But what we observe actually is the decrease in spreads. So the dim light bar here, it's actually what happened. And so you can see the difference with the counterfactual. So that would be been a very big problem for Europe. Now, what are the main research questions and contribution of this paper? Paper you can find, that you can download from is a BIS technical report now. Actually, yes, it was evident that the PPP, these unconventional monetary policies, had an effect on the spread. As I show you, the spread really decreased. They went down dramatically after the announcement. But the point is, what is the effect? What will be the effect in the long term? And what is the effect in the long term of, for debt sustainability? This is a very important research question. It's very important to address because it will give also support to policymakers about unconventional monetary policy. There was a discussion among, orthodox and non-orthodox economists if the central banks, should act, should intervene or not. So we think that the results that I'm going to present you, they are in favor of, these unconventional monetary policies. And the other question that we are monitoring now is that what would happen when ECB stops purchases and unwinds its portfolios? Because this is a very important point, is the debt going again rocket sky, or is just maintaining, a level which is sustainable? So it's this would be the beneficial effect and of the unwinds and returning to the conventional monetary policies. And as we will see, the answer is it depends. It depends also on the timing of unwinding. And one of the other concerns, especially in the as I say, orthodox economies, is that unconventional monetary policies, all this money, printing money, it will cause inflation, and then it's very difficult then to absorb inflation. And so the point is that what happens if there is actually we experience, but we experience for many other reasons, the war in Ukraine and the shortage in supply chain and so on. What about if there is an inflation shock? I mean, should we worry about that? Then we also look at the effect. How does what is the effect of such a policies in the trade-off? As we see, there is a trade-off between financing cost and risk. So what is the effect? If we represent this trade-off through a Pareto of efficient frontier, does the efficient frontier move, or just stay there? Can we help the PDMO, to the public debt manager, to make its choice given the PPP, or in general any unconventional monetary policies? Like, for example, in Japan, they have had such a policy since 2008. They have the quantitative easing that is still on. They have this yield curve control that try to make the 10-year bonds yield very low in order to sustain the economies. So, I mean, these are our research questions, and we will contribute on that. So let me give you exactly, the framework, and the framework is that of debt sustainability, analysis of sustainability of debt, of sovereign debt. In particular, in doing that, lending institution like IMF, but also ECB, or the European Council, they look at two main aggregates that are the debt dynamics, which is a measure of the stock of debt. Like Italy is now 147% debt to GDP, and the other measure is the so-called gross financing need, which is a measure of flow. Is a measure of liquidity, and it is not very much known measure. Usually, what goes in the news is the debt level, but gross financing need is very important. It's very important. It seems that the cause of the Greek debt problem was due to a liquidity problem. It was not a matter of stock. Actually, the stock, the debt of stock of Greece was not that high. We have, looking at that, I mean, this is traditional, the sustainability analysis, and we, with in the paper, then the analysis we developed for the European stability mechanism, we introduce a debt financing strategy. So we try to say, okay, I mean, what about if we change the debt issuance? Does it make any effect on the sustainability analysis? And based on that, we built our model for the sustainability analysis. But moreover, our analysis is the stochastic debt sustainability analysis, in the sense that the exogenous variables, which are, in any debt sustainability analysis, are usually GDP and primary balance and interest rates. The exogenous variables are random variables, and in particular, in our case, they are represented through a scenario tree. Now, just to give you a pictorial representation of our scenario tree, but you can find also details in this paper we published some years ago in Quantitative Finance. Basically, we model uncertainty around baseline projection. Economists and people working in this field, they look at baseline projection about, as I say, GDP growth, primary balance, risk-free or policy rate. This baseline projection comes from, economic analysis or partial or equilibrium models. And we build around this baseline projection our tree by matching moments basically with the expected values are the baseline projection, and we build around using historical standard deviation and correlation. We build a scenario trees. So consider that each point of this tree is a vector, or for the BIS model, indeed, is a vector of 4 quantities, which are the output gap, the real GDP growth, the primary balance, and the inflation rate. So we have these exogenous variables that are, random variables. They are dynamics. So it's the dynamic random. It's a stochastic process, basically. The policy rate in this case is endogenous process. Is an endogenous process which is determined by the famous Taylor rule, where basically the interest rate, the policy rate depends on the deviation from the expected inflation and output gap. Just to give you an idea, I mean, these are some simulation cases where you see, the dashed lines, they come from their equilibrium model. So they have a partial semi-equilibrium model, and we built such a scenario trees. Of course, here this is a fun chart representation, which is given by simply a transformation of the discrete scenarios in a continuous distribution, and of course, I mean, the main characteristic is that since we don't know, deep in the futures, like, the point is that that sustainability analysis must run over horizon, or at least 40 years, because 40, 50 years, because, the debt maturities are, very long in some cases. But, since that we don't know actually, deep in the futures, what we can do is just to assume that we have a kind of long-term convergence towards, a steady state value of inflation, in this case, primary balance and output gap. The policy rate, in this case, is basically is obtained through a Taylor rule, which merge all these 3 things, and we obtain the policy rate. Policy rate, that is, we can think about the policy rate as the risk-free rate, and for the European country, we add to the risk-free rate a credit risk spread. And this is the key point of all this model. In particular, well, before then going to that, once we have this, these stochastic variables, and of course, the gross financing need and the debt stock is a function of these random variables. So what you obtain is also a stochastic process for the gross financing need and the debt stocks. Now, you can look at this as an unconditional distribution. And actually, this is the unconditional distribution of the gross financing need. And we are interested, we want to give to our analysis in the ESN model to look at this from the risk management point of view. We are interested at the value at risk. But value at risk, as you know, is an order statistics, which is very difficult to optimize or to put as an objective function. So if we want to, we look at the tails, but we look at the tails in the sense that we look at the expected value of the tails, what is known as a conditional value at risk, that is this famous paper that show that it can be an optimization of the conditional value at risk is basically a linear program. So our objective will be to to put a bound on the expected value of these tails. Indeed, I just summarized here. This is a very general, short description of the model, which is much more complex, of course, because there are many equations describing all the system of the dynamic and the financing strategies. Now, let's assume that we have X. X is a vector of financing instruments. So it could be a zero coupon bond, could be a 20-year bullet bond, a 30-year bullet bonds. So we can make a choice on what is the issuance, and we try to issue bonds such as that the cost of servicing, this is the cost of debt. So this is the cost of servicing debt is minimized. And at the same time, you remember, we have these tails, changing the financing strategy, the tail change, and we put a bound on this gross financing need, on this expected value, but also we control for the debt to be decreasing. Now, by changing omega, what we obtain is a trade-off. This is the measure of risk, and this is the expected cost of our program. So we change omega, and we obtain a different level of the, we have a trade-off between risk and cost. And basically what we obtain are efficient frontiers like this, where we have, along this axis, we have the cost, the so-called rollover risk, the gross financing need. And here in this axis, we have the expected cost. So as you see, you can have low cost at the, high cost at the minimum risk. This is the case, for example, when you issue bonds which are long-term bonds, only long-term bonds, the extreme in principle, they could be perpetuities, for example. You have a very low risk because, you don't have the refinancing problem, you don't have the rollover risk, but this comes at a very high cost. On the contrary, on the other side of the efficient frontier, you have minimum cost. For example, you issue only zero coupon bonds, but this comes at high rollover risk, because if you issue all your debt with zero coupon bonds, with short-term bonds, then you are facing all the volatility of the exogenous variables. So basically, these are this is the starting point of our results. So we always show this, efficient frontier. Now, for each of these points, it corresponds a dynamics of the debt stock and of some more other variables like the endogenous spread, because we endogenously determine the spread. Now, about the spread or the risk premium, as I say, for this particular model, well, for the ESM, we introduce a mechanism where the risk-free rate, the rate at which the sovereign is funding is debt is basically determined by the policy rate or the risk-free rate plus a risk premium. I mean, this is a characteristics of euro, as I say, because we have this, we don't have a common debt, and then for the BIS model, for this model, we also have to we have to also measure the effect of the asset purchases, the purchases from the ECB of sovereign bonds. And this, of course, will, suppress the level of spread. In particular, for conventional monetary policies, what you observe is that the risk premium, at least for European countries, is a function of the debt levels. We have a nonlinear, we estimated together with ESM, we have a nonlinear function, like that when you have a very low debt, below 60% of debt to GDP, the spread is quite low, if not zero. And then increase, and at a certain point, it becomes flat, because, you cannot increase indefinitely the spread, because this will kick you out of the market. So, if you reach a given level, then you have to ask for financial assistance to ESM. For example, this is what happened to Greece, Ireland, Cyprus, and Spain, during the Euro sovereign crisis. In the case of unconventional monetary policies, we also observe, a suppression of spreads due to the asset purchases. In particular, we observe that this is different for countries. Different countries, they have this different reaction to asset purchases. And we observe, we make some, as you see, we estimate empirical this spread suppression. In particular, this is a picture where the dots are the real numbers, and on this axis, we have the cumulative ECB net purchases. And here we have the reduction ratio. So, for example, for very low, well, when we start, they start buying, we observe, it is observed, I mean, these are real numbers, we observe like 40%, from 20 to 40% reduction. As you see, this is higher for countries like Greece and Portugal, but lower for, lower but significantly for countries like Spain and Italy. And then, as the purchases increase, the suppression also increase, but it increases with decreasing increments. So, and this is expected. I mean, you cannot zero totally. At a certain point you can increase the purchases, but the level of spread is, it cannot change. Actually, in Italy, it basically, now it's 180 basis points, but it reached like 100 at most. So we estimate, we estimate a quadratic function. I mean, this is the estimate. I mean, it was done using fixed effect model, nonlinear model, and we estimate a kind of quadratic function for spread suppression. This is a very important part of our modeling, because we will look at the unwinding. Basically, the unwinding will be go to reverse. So we first observe, the asset purchases, the effect of asset purchases, and then, to look at the effect of unwinding, we will, basically revert the level of purchases to look at the effect on the sustainability. Okay, so okay, how much time do I have left? Am I left? I mean, is it okay? Can I go ahead? So it's
Yeah, it's you have a lot of time. It's half an hour. So if I may suggest, if you want, usually people stop saying 15 minutes and then you have 15 minutes for questions, but it's your choice.
I think I will finish in 15 minutes, but if you have any question, I mean, you just raise your hands, no problem. I mean, okay. So let me show you some of the results and the answers that to the research questions actually that we try to give. Now, one of the main question was, I mean, what is the effect, the long-term effect of the PPP? And in general, what is the long-term effect of any unconventional monetary policies? This is very important. Also, we wrote a paper, we had a kind of spin-off paper for the Japanese case. And it's also, in the technical reports of the BIS at the moment. No, I think it's not, Stavros, maybe this is on the, I mean, I can give you whoever is interested, I will send you a copy of this paper. So, the story is that the question was, okay, what is the effect, the long-term effect? Because we know what is the short-term effect. And you see here, I mean, you see this is the dynamics of the spread. And you see here two overlay figures. One, the blue one, if there was no PPP would have been implemented. And the color one is with PPP. Now, as you see, in the short term, the suppression of spread, it will make, of course, the reduction of spread. I mean, this is observed. But what about if PPP ends in 2024? Now, here we have the reversion. So we revert, we unwind the purchases. And as you can see, of course, the reversion will increase the spread. I mean, there is no way out of it. But, interestingly, what we observe is that the long-term spread is lower. And this happens for any quantile of the spread distribution. The same occur for debt. As you see here, the blue lines are the spread, the debt levels if no PPP was implemented, and the color one is when PPP and correspond to the case where the unwinding start basically next year. So even for next year unwinding, there is a beneficial effect in long term for debt. Look at the expected value, see the dashed line, the expected value of debt in case of PPP unwinding even in 2024, and that one for no PPP is much higher. So it not only is much higher, but it's also, you see there is this kind of torsion towards, an increasing path that is very dangerous for that. One of the problems in assessing sustainability is to have debt that is stable. It's not a matter of the level, but what is very important is that, I mean, you don't have an increasing, like a snowball effect. So we think, that was a very important answer that we were looking at. So actually, unconventional monetary policies, they have also an effect in long time periods. Now, the other point we want to look at is the timing of unwinding. Okay, now just look at this picture. We look at the interquartile interval at the end of the period. And then we plot the interquartile at the end of the period for different unwinding strategies. So we have no PPP, unwinding in 2024, unwinding in 2030, and then the dream for any, I think it's a politician, maybe, QE eternity. So no unwinding. So it's always, maintaining the same purchases of bonds level. Of course, I mean, these are some other implications, but we want to just point out this possibility, which is quite theoretical. Now, as you will see, you can notice the unwinding, the unwinding strategy matters, and even for unwinding next year, the interquartile change of the long-term debt is quite lower compared to no PPP at all. And, the dashed line that you see here is the dashed line of the level of debt before the PPP started. So as you can see, on average, we are below the starting value of the initial debt. So there is, of course, an important effect due to the unwinding decision. What I would say is that the more gradual the unwinding, the more this will favor debt. And also, look at this picture here. This is a very important picture because this is an ongoing discussion in the between the European Committee and economists in Europe, because now the focus in Europe is that you had an increase of debt. All the European countries had an increase of debt, but then we have to go back to the old business, the old normal, which is a given level of debt. Now, the 60% level, it was considered too strict. Actually, it doesn't work. So now the discussion now is, how much is the extra fiscal effort that any country must put on the dish of debt reduction in order to, well, not debt reduction, in order to stabilize that. So it's not just a request to go down to 60%, as is the rule of the Maastricht Treaty, but we want you to make an effort to stabilize that. Now, as you see here, on the left axis, we report, and this, bar here are the extra fiscal effort required. Now, if the no PPP would have been implemented, there is an extra fiscal effort, which is a positive surplus, which means less expenses and more taxes, basically, and this is extra fiscal effort is higher than 1%, while with 2024 unwinding is significantly lower, and this is quite low in case of unwinding in 2030. Of course, in case of Q eternity, and this was something that it was at some point addressed by Blanchard, Q eternity, you can run a deficit and still, have a stable debt if you can. But I mean, this is, again, is a theoretical issue. From the other side of the axis, you see, we also plot this line, which is the number of years that you must have a fiscal effort. And as you see, and as you see, as you can notice, the more gradual is the unwinding, and the lower is the number of years that you have to maintain a surplus on your primary balance. As a final, I guess, yes, as a final, the final answer, to one of the questions, what about inflation? I mean, should we worry about inflation? Well, we run in our model a case where we have an inflation spike. And actually, we look at two possible cases. The case where inflation spikes and we have a monetary reaction. So usually, this is a strict conventional monetary policies where if you have an inflation spike, and this deviates from the expectation, which for Europe is 2%, then you have a sudden increase in rates, which is what actually happened in these days. And then we have the case where we have inflation spike, but without reaction from the European Central Bank. As you can see, I mean, there is no much difference, no much impact of this inflation. So the impact is quite small. And in particular, you know, the effect of inflation is controversial in the stability analysis, because inflation increases the GDP. So when the GDP increase, which is at the denominator of the debt to GDP, this will depress the debt to GDP. But at the same time, an increase in inflation will also increase the policy rate. So it depends on the pace, the rate of these two policies change, which will make the difference there. Then, you know, what you observe is that, again, these are the interquartile change for the different PPP exit strategies. And as you see, you know, the more gradual is the exit strategy, and the lower is the impact of an inflation spike. So, you know, orthodox economists should not really worry about, you know, of the compounding, the combination of an unconventional monetary policy and, you know, an inflation spikes. Okay, so I get to the conclusions. So let me just summarize some of the main issues our contribution. Yes, central bank asset purchases lower sovereign financing costs, and it definitely contribute to debt sustainability. So this is true also. We observe the same behavior for the Japanese economy. That is, for years been under the quantitative easing strategy. The unwinding timing matters, and these affect the debt level of the fiscal and the fiscal effort. And what we just highlight here is that we observe large positive impact even when we have an early unwinding. So, I mean, this is something that, probably next year, the ECB will start probably unwinding, but still there is a beneficial, to that, because we observe, at least from our model, the spreads basically do not return to pre-PPP levels. The impact of inflation, it can be considered very tiny, so negligible, and this depends, of course, on how the central banks react. And yes, of course, there is also an effect of the this is something which I did not show you in this, but what we observe is the efficient frontiers basically lower down. They move down, if the exit strategy basically goes long in the time window. So that's it for my side, and I'm here to collect your question. I hope I was in time. Yes, I guess so. Yes.